Hi, my name's Brian with a Y, and this is one of my pigeons, Charlie Daniels. Thanks for being a good sport, Charlie. Anyways, I recently got into film photography, getting close to about a year ago. And in my time of getting into this, I dived head first. Well, I really like mechanical cameras. Fully mechanical cameras, I just think they're neat. So, I picked up a new Nikon F2. And I have had this for a few months now. And when I pulled it out of the box, contrary to what I normally do, I did not read the manual. And I was a real gene-ass when I first got it. And one of the first big mistakes that I made was with the battery compartment. Now, like many of my SLRs, you have your little battery compartment on the bottom. And like any normal person, you'd think, oh, well, like all my other SLRs, you just turn it around until eventually your battery compartment comes off. And then you stick your battery in there and you My cat almost ate Charlie Daniels. Anyways, you put your battery in, screw your battery compartment back on. And all's well and ends well. You look on the bottom here and you have this little slot. And you say, well, like all my other SLRs, this coin should fit in this slot and I should be able to just turn it around. And I should just be able to keep unscrewing it. Well, that's not the case with the Nikon F2. The Nikon F2, you should only be able to turn about 90 degrees, and then comes out. And I was raised with this very good saying, which I hope you take with you. And that saying is, you shouldn't ever have to force things. And against my better judgment, I took a screwdriver and kept turning this little compartment door around and round and round and round until eventually I said, something's wrong here, let me look at the manual. Well, like I said before, you should only have to turn it 90 degrees and it comes out. So the little hard stops in here, I've actually rounded out. They still work to an extent, but I screwed them up. So that's the first big mistake I made with this. Now, the second mistake I didn't make until recently. I've had this camera a few months and I've put probably 10 or 15 rolls of film through it. And when I was shooting Cinestill 400D the other day, I had taken my 100mm f2 off the camera, and instead I went to swap my 50mm on there. And when I swapped my 50mm on there, I put it back into my bag, the whole camera and everything, set it aside, and just kind of went about my day. Well, as I was driving around, I saw this 66 Mercury Comet Caliente pulled into my dentist's office, and I said, well, you know, let me go take some pictures of it. So I grabbed my Minolta, and I grabbed my Nikon, and I get out of the car, and I snapped some pictures with my Minolta. I set it down, and I grabbed my Nikon, and I noticed that they were both 400 speed films. I had 400 T-Max in my Minolta, and I had 400D in my Nikon. And I noticed that the light meters were reading differently. And you know, with cameras this old, of course they're going to read a little different. But these were pretty decently off. And you have this gut feeling, and as I've gotten older, I've realized maybe I should just trust my gut a lot more. And it was off, but it was only off by about one or two stops, and I said, well, maybe I'm just not doing something right. So I just checked it, and I said, oh, my ISO is correct, and everything looks fine. I said, okay, you know what, screw it, I'll just keep taking the pictures. Well, if you look right here on the front, you have this little window. And right now, you probably can't see it. It says 5.6. Well, for those of you who don't know, the Nikon F2 this prism goes down. It has this little arm that sticks up, and it goes to these little rabbit ears on the lens. And this is actually connected to the aperture ring. Well, as you turn your aperture ring, it moves that little arm. And that actuates everything inside your prism. And that's how it knows what aperture it's at. Well, that little window, I always thought was just telling you, hey, you're at f5.6. And right now, if you look at the lens, it does look like I'm set to f5.6. Well, let me turn it all the way down to f1.4. Now, it says f2 in here, but it's actually pushed a little bit past it. But if I bring it all the way back up to f16, it hasn't moved in that little window. And what I learned after I got my film back was that these pictures were grossly underexposed. You could still tell that it was a picture of a car, and I don't really use Lightroom to try and fix my pictures. If it's something, you know, really special to me, like I'm taking pictures of my nieces and my nephew, I'll use Lightroom for things like that, especially if I'm using my medium format, my Mamiya. That's so expensive to shoot that I want to get as much as I can out of it, so I'll use Lightroom. But for 35mm, when I'm just casually walking around, I'm not really going to waste my time trying to tweak every picture till it's perfect. I'm not really a perfectionist. Well, I sat there and I said to myself, why were these underexposed? And I had set this down. Now I have quite a few SLRs and I like to rotate them around. So I set it aside and I said, I'll just think about it and come back later. Well, I did end up coming back later, and I picked it up and I looked at it, and I looked at the front and I saw in that little window it said f5.6. And I noticed I had it set somewhere else. And I said, well, that's weird. So I rotated it, and it changed. The window changed. It went from like f5.6 to f4. And I said, well, hang on a minute. And I pushed it all the way down, and the window went all the way to f1.4. And I said, oh, I was like, let me change it back. And I went it back to f5.6, and it never moved. And that's when I looked into it, and I found out that, and I can't explain it, I'm not real savvy like that. The prism has to almost be, I guess we could say, zeroed out. And when you bring it all the way down to your lowest aperture, the prism is set properly. So every time you take your lens off and you swap a new one on, you set it to your highest aperture, you hook it in, it clicks into place, we're at f5.6, and then you rotate it down to your lowest aperture. Now, I just made another very crucial mistake. I didn't have my lens clicked in all the way. Now, all amateur mistakes, which is why I'm making this video. So you see it's at f1.4 now, and this lens only goes down to f2.5. Now, I had not made this mistake in the 6 months I've had this camera and all these rolls of film. I had not made this mistake yet. And I get it, I'm new. f2.5. I get it, I'm new. You're gonna make mistakes. But stuff like that with, especially the f2, with the huge aftermarket and just all the accessories it has, it's little things like that that you really need to know, that you're gonna make those mistakes, you're gonna feel real stupid, like I do right now. But I really want to spread the word that when you're using these SLRs, when you're using these old cameras, especially mechanical cameras, there's all these little quirks that you have to know. And in this case, it's not as simple as just slapping the lens on there and coming back to it like this Minolta. Now what's cool about this is the SR505 or the SRT202. This is what they called it in Japan, the SR505. This, inside the viewfinder, tells you your shutter speed and your aperture. Well, it tells you your aperture through this little prism here at the bottom, and if there's enough light, it'll reflect off your aperture ring and it'll show up inside your viewfinder. So it doesn't matter on that one. But on this it does, because this is a whole different system. This works completely different. And you need to be aware of those little things. Now, when I take this prism off, you can get a better view of the little mechanism right in here. That's the little arm that comes down that your rabbit ears grab. But if I use the waist level viewfinder, and you can actually 3D print these little covers for the bottom, I'm pretty sure they're universal across all the F2 prisms and possibly going into other models. When you look, your waist level doesn't have that. So it's just one of those little things you need to be aware of. Now I understood how this worked, but I did not know that you had to zero it all the way out and bring it back. And like I did earlier where I put this lens on and I didn't have it clicked in all the way. So I encourage you, if you are going to get an F2 or really anything, make sure you're fully aware and don't do what I did and just jump in thinking you know what you're doing, because you're going to screw up the battery compartment like I did. You're going to feel stupid, or some of your pictures are going to come out underexposed and it's going to be a whole, 10, 15 rolls of film later when you make that mistake and you have to learn it later. And that was just something that was so easily avoidable. And here I am now, feeling stupid. Thankfully, it was only for about 5 pictures that it turned out that way. So in the end, I'm not mad at myself too much about it. It's all a learning mistake. And you're going to make mistakes, and that's all about film photography. I think for the first 6 months, I'd take my film to the lab, and I'd get, out of 38 exposures you can get on a 36 exposure roll, and yes, you can get 38. I think I would only get like 30. Maybe I'd get 36 sometimes. You're going to go into film photography, you're going to make these mistakes. And if you're in a situation where I'm in, no one in my family has ever done photography. And all the old guys and ladies who used these, who grew up with these, they're dying off. And there's so much information on the internet, and that thing about using the prism, that's out there too. It's just so easy to jump in and screw up. And these cameras, they're not necessarily like the new digital ones, like my Sony a7 II, where it does so much for you. You could say the new digital cameras are a tool, but I like to think these are closer to being a tool than the new ones, in the sense of how you use them, how you operate them. I'm an industrial maintenance technician. I'm constantly working on machinery all day, and there's all these tools that you can use. You're going to go into the field, and I'm sure if you go into automotive field, if you go to do pipeline work, like you're going to be a welder, if you're going to go into process control, that's like pumps and whatnot, you're going to see all these new tools. And jumping into film photography, especially with these mechanical cameras, they're a tool. They work. They just simply work. It's all springs, gears, cogs, and a little bit of cloth for your shutter, unless you have a metal shutter. And it's just really neat how all these little parts put together work to give you a picture. And this tool, all it does is it controls light. And controlling the light gives you your picture, controlling it properly. So you need to look at these if you buy them as a tool. And if you don't want to screw up your tool, learn how to use it right. Don't be like me and, jump in there with your quarter thinking you know what you're doing. Don't throw your lens on there and walk around. Always double check everything. Read the manual and please take care of them. Please get them serviced if you can. If you're going to buy one that's, in good condition. Don't sit there and buy an old one that's hasn't really ever been taken care of and then complain later, because you're going to regret it if you do. But there again, battery compartment, changing your aperture. And another good thing to note is for the shutter speed is you have to rotate this around because there is an actual mechanism that connects in there. So you have to click it all into place. So yeah, don't be a gene ass like me.